Meanwhile, if there weren't a budget mess, there's a really interesting foreign policy dilemma for the White House that didn't get as much attention this week as it might have otherwise, which is what do you do to help the Syrian opposition? And the administration's leaned a little more forward into helping the opposition, but not nearly far enough to give them guns. So where do you think that leaves them?
Well, they are now going to provide more direct non-lethal aid to the resistance within Syria. This, again, it's MRE, it's medical supplies.
MRE? Maybe they're going to give them those
bad
foil wrapped food?
You know, they're much tastier than they were 10 years ago. I can tell you that. And so, you know, as long as they don't make the mistake of sending the pork rib, they'll be okay. But you're right, the administration is in a pickle here. There's increasing pressure to do something, and there's a reluctance to get involved in a very messy situation.
Reluctance starting right at the top. I think the president does not want to get into
owning
Syria here.
Right, but what's the trade-off? So on one hand, if you get involved, it could be like owning Syria. You'd be in another Iraq.
Correct.
Barack Obama ran against that. But what's the other side? What about staying out and letting these you know, quote, freedom fighters struggle and they win and we don't have any relationship?
Well, not just do they win and we don't have any relationship with them, they win and they win with the worst actors in the bunch in the opposition group having gotten supremacy, because the people who were the more moderates who say, just wait, the West will come to our aid, are discredited because the U.S. didn't come to their aid. Now, I think the downside risks are considerable here, because I think if you get into Syria and you own the problem because you've helped drive out Assad, then you got to fix Syria. I think that's a 10-year proposition. I mean, we just saw that in two places, Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think it is an exquisite dilemma, and I understand the argument for not diving in with both feet, but it is an uncomfortable question.
Right, and there's even been disagreement within the Obama administration about how to proceed, and also on Capitol Hill. I mean, there are some folks in Congress calling for, you know, sending in weapons. Rubio this week said send ammunition, and so I mean there's certainly a lot of different viewpoints on this, and so, you know, this is John Kerry's first trip, and he has to wade right into this and kind of walk this fine line of saying, okay, we're going to get a little more involved, but not too involved.
But see, there's another danger here that is, if you keep going down that path, which is if you get a little involved in Syria, which is let's send a few guns, but it's not enough to tip the balance of power, well, then you have a choice. You can either look really ineffective, which is a bad thing for a superpower, or then you have to double down and send the really big stuff so that you win. And once you're in, you have to be in all the way to win, or you look ineffective.
So who is it that's holding Assad in power? If the Russians gave, would that do it? I mean, the Saudis have now weighed in on the Islamists.
It seems it's the Russians.
Right. So we have the U.S. Arab allies have been funding money and arms to rebels inside Syria for a while. Unfortunately, to a large extent, those arms have gone to the more extreme groups that are ideologically aligned with Al-Qaeda and others. The Russian support for the Assad regime is crucial, and people are watching. If that pulls back, does that weaken Assad? Does that force him into an enclave on the coast, or does that give an opening for the West to be more aggressive? You know, there are Russians inside Syria, and that can get messy. And the question is there a way to get involved that doesn't you know, mean that the U.S. owns a problem? I mean, from the beginning, the U.S. has wanted the solution to be so that Turkey or another ally is the main player ensuring stability long term.
After Assad's gone.
After Assad's gone, and not a situation where the U.S. is aimed. But the White House has always been worried with every solution that it will lead to, in Iraq and Afghanistan, a multi-trillion-dollar proposition.
Which is not an implausible fear, it seems to me. I mean, that's been the history of these things for many, many decades.
Right. I mean, there is, obviously, we had an intervention in Libya that did not involve U.S. troops on the ground in the end. Of course, that solution is imperfect, because when you rely on local forces,
you have Benghazi.
You get Benghazi.
But also the Syrian military has a lot more muscle than the Libyan.
Absolutely,
that's right, and it's a much tougher geography, and I mean, quite frankly, the air defenses of Syria mean a military option is lengthy and very difficult.